Hi, welcome everybody to this week's Under the Hat with Gavin and myself. We're delighted this week to have a good friend of mine from British Athletics, Director of Performance Programs, Steve Paulding. Steve, thanks for giving up your time this evening.
My pleasure. Good to join you. Hope we can have a good chat over the next hour or so.
No, brilliant. Yeah, Steve, I mean, you've got a very decorated career in the world of performance sport, but turning back the clock a little bit, you originally started out your career as an athlete in the world of cycling, and I know you were in 2 Commonwealth Games, competed at the highest of levels. It'd be great to hear a little bit of your journey as an athlete back when you were competing, and a little bit of your experiences with the coaching in the world of cycling and performance sport as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, going back, into the, believe it or not, into the late 70s and early 80s when I was certainly having the height of my career is the world of cycle sport was very different than it is now. To be honest, most people in cycling were seen as a little bit strange. There weren't many people involved and it didn't sort of have the profile that it does now. I can assure you that when I got into cycling really through school, which was very unusual at that time, and I got into cycling because it got me out of some lessons and got me half a day to go out and ride my bike while other people did other activities. So, I really got into cycling more by default than it was, that was my ambition to be an elite cyclist. And really most of my career was doing it full time, committing to it, alongside a job and college and university and all the things that people do, but in a very different world than sport is now. So cycling wasn't mainstream in my day. I was doing it because I found it was something I was pretty good at and I just enjoyed it. And then I didn't have any success as a relatively young athlete. It was really as a cyclist into my probably early 20s before I had any meaningful success at a sort of senior level. I wasn't a great junior, didn't have a young career, wasn't that sort of somebody anyone was looking at. And it was more through perseverance and wearing everyone down that I actually had my biggest successes in cycling. In fact, one of my most successful years in cycling was my last year. I was 35 years old, and the sprint title that I'd been trying to win for about 12 years, I won in that year as I was coming into my retirement, which again, very unusual to win a sprint competition at the end of your career as opposed to the beginning of your career. So I had an unusual journey through cycling, but it was what drove me in, and it opened the door to nearly everything else that I did within sport was that background I had in cycling.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, and I think you talk a little bit about the way that it's changed now, where I think amateur athletes, if you like, are what I would call, especially in the golfing world, professional amateurs, where they focus really full time on their golf, and very few of them balance a full time job like you did, or full time education that doesn't involve the sport to it. How do you think that the world of cycling and the world of sport in general, I mean, you're involved with British Athletics, how do you think that's changed over the past 15, 20 years?
Well, I think for certain sports, the money in sport has increased massively, and the backing for lots of sports has increased. My own sport, cycling, when I look back at my career, there was little or no money into it until the lottery started to fund, and that was as I was coming out of retirement. That's where I got one of my first jobs in sort of full on sport, was within the cycling team as the head coach for the Olympic program, because lottery funded had meant that athletes could be full time and that they could also have full time professional coaching staff, physios, doctors, mechanics, masseurs, all the things that go with it. And that just wasn't there in my day. And and obviously, having spent quite a lot of time in golf, there is that very big demarcation in golf between you're an amateur and there's certain things you can and can't do, and then you're a professional. And again, it closes certain doors and opens other opportunities.
Yeah.
Most sports other than golf, to be honest, don't do that anymore. In my day, there was amateur cycling and professional cycling, and that merged into one over my career and my journey. You know, as the Eastern Bloc closed down as well, you know, I was lucky enough to travel into East Berlin through the Brandenburg Gate to actually compete against the East Germans in Germany, doing things that were very unusual at that time. And I got to do all those things through sport. And that, for me, that amateurish approach we had then has gone. And there's very few sports where that still exists now. Probably one of the biggest things that already I learned is that, you know, you've got to enjoy and love the sport you're doing. And I think, you know, you do have to really love the sport you're doing, and you've got to want to do it for the right reasons. You've got to do it because you just love it and you want to be as good as you can. There's an awful lot of people I find now coming into sport because they're driven by the potential rewards at the end. You know, and once upon a time, nobody made much money out of cycling except some of the very top level Tour de France riders. And now a lot of people can make a lot of money out of cycling if they do well, and they can get the sponsorships and promotion. And you look at your Bradley Wiggins, you look at your Chris Hoys, these sort of athletes now have big sponsors, and even in their retirement are able to continue with a sort of professional sporting career off the back of what they've done in their life. And that didn't really exist in certainly in cycling when I was younger. So the world has moved on significantly, and I really see that. But I do worry that a lot of the fun that I see a lot of people had in my time journey through sport, I see less and less of the youngsters having that. Very early specialization, very early drive towards the professional end of the sport, whether that's in golf, turning professional early, or whether it's in other sports, giving away an education, giving away the opportunity to build the plan B, the what am I going to do if I don't succeed? And whatever happens, that we know the percentages of people that really earn money out of top sport, whether that's in golf or whether it's in football or even in cycling, is very limited. And that's one of the things we try to make sure most of our athletes in athletics think about now is you need to have some sort of plan B. Education is really important. You never know when your career could finish through, you know, career stopping injuries, particularly in athletics, big hamstring injuries, foot injuries, these type of things happen all the time. People lose big chunks of their opportunity. We're finding now as we lead up to the Olympics in Tokyo, everyone's pushing really hard, and this is when the injuries come. And your one chance maybe to be in the Olympics is all reliant on this next 8 weeks. And some athletes have gone through 12 years of training. It's been postponed a bit, and it looks like it's the chance, and they're pushing hard, and they break, and that might be their one opportunity gone. Because in 3 years' time, when we get to Paris, they may not be in the right position, the right age, demographic, performance to be in line for a selection. So sport has become fairly brutal. And I think it's really noticeable to me in my 30 odd years of the more amateur fun element of it has very much gone. And I still think even to succeed at the very top level, you've still got to really enjoy it and really love it and really want to do it, and not be driven by the rewards at the end, that either the fame, the pseudo reward of fame, or the very big cash purses that a lot of sports are now dangling in front of youngsters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'll be music to Gavin's ears there, in terms of, you know, the whole concept of what we do with Leadbetter Kids is really to try and develop that love and that passion, and help the kids fall in love with the game for the right reasons, and make sure that they have fun. I don't know, Gav, do you want to jump in there? Because I'm sure you were kind of, the bell was chiming when you were hearing a lot of that.
Yeah, there's so much obviously to that, and I think the stance that I've definitely got now is that creating an elite level golfer is a byproduct of what we do, right? We're never going to create that opportunity to build that for the golfer unless they truly love it to begin with, because it's that love that takes them through all the stresses and strains of developing their skill up to that elite level. You know, it's really, really tough. The troughs are far deeper than the highs. And unless you do have that inherent love for the sport and what you do, and you're really focused on what the outcome is, perhaps, then you're never going to pull yourself through it. It's just going to be a one-way ticket to a different career. So I think it's fascinating to hear that. And obviously you've got great experience, Steve, from your own personal successes, and now, of course, what you do as a real job. I wanted to ask a question actually in relation to performance, and I want to know how you can, as much as possible, guarantee that you perform to your potential when it matters. I mean, obviously we're talking about marginal gains, but what advice do you have to that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You know, I can talk this sort of performance-y stuff for ages and try and cross-relate it. You know, in marginal gains is a big thing that, you know, has taken off because of cycling and some of the stuff they did. And the reality is, in the world that I work in now, and I work in the world of Olympic medalists and Olympic finalists and the top athletes that are currently within the athletic system. But for a lot of them still, marginal gains isn't what anyone's looking at. It's doing the basics and doing it really, really well and consistently, and really understanding and knowing yourself as a person and an athlete. And so many people have got stuck into the, you know, the 0.5%, the 0.2%, when they still need to do the 5% and 3% to actually get them to where they need to be. So for me, what I find is, you know, and it was very interesting when I first came into golf, it is because I'd come from sports that were very measurable and measured all the time. You know, where we were forever looking at the statistics around in cycling, how fast you accelerated. We had obviously speed sensors and power cranks measuring power. We were looking at drag coefficients. We were looking at temperature and air pressure and all these sort of things to look at how do we get the athletes in the velodrome to go as fast as they can. And then I came into golf, and I was just quite surprised how few athletes coming on their journey through, and yes, it was the amateur end of the game, were really keeping good analysis of their stats. And when you asked them, what does an average round of golf look like, they weren't really able to do it. And so what are you actually practicing in relation to the game? You know, if you know that 42% of the game is going to be putts on green, is 42% of your practice in relation to what the real game is like? Are you playing enough games under some level of pressure? It's great to play really nice games all the time in the dry and the warm. Oh, it's not great today, I'll go on the range because I can be under shelter. The reality is, you can be in the biggest tournament of your life in the worst weather, and if you can cope with that, you're more likely to do your best performance in that day and be competitive. And I find a lot of people weren't spending enough time really understanding what the competitive environment's like, and putting themselves under that and even more pressure than that in their day-to-day practice and training. And obviously we did a lot of stuff looking at skill acquisition. We did a lot of stuff with the sports psychologist looking at how do we help athletes do their best performance on the day. And a lot of what we talk about in athletics now about what it takes to win as a concept is about not just when do you do your best performance, it's when do you do best performance when you really need to do your best performance. And your best performance needs to be in the third round at the final at the Olympic Games. It doesn't need to be in the first round or the second round. It actually needs to be in the final, but you've got to do enough in each of those rounds. And if not many competitions have 3 rounds, you never get to practice it until you go to the biggest competitions. So how can we replicate the fact you have certain amount of rounds over a certain amount of days? It's a bit like some of the challenges we would have had in amateur golf is when a player was pretty good until you took them to the to probably the Europeans, and they had to play 2 rounds a day, day after day after day, and they were so physically unfit that by the time we needed to play them at their best, they were physically at their worst. because they hadn't prepared well enough for what is the thing we're trying to win. We're not trying to win the club competition, one match a week over a month. We're actually trying to win a competition where you've got to play 2 rounds a day for 5 or 6 days back to back. And creating that understanding of the competitive pressure at the very top end of what you need to do is the things that we try to replicate in all of the different jobs that we've done. I've done in sport, whether that was in cycling, whether it's athletics, whether it's advising other sports because of other roles I've had, has always been in that sort of ilk. How do you make your training as appropriate as possible, put as much pressure on as possible, and train for the biggest event that you're going to do, and make sure you can cope with all the conditions and different scenarios that may play out in that.
It's a real challenge.
Yeah, one of the things was we used to do this with the Scottish golfers. You had your full warm up, your short warm up, and your emergency warm up. So your car broke down, and you've actually now only got 15 minutes, and you've got to tee off. What you're going to do? Well, I need an hour and a half to warm up. Well, you haven't got an hour and a half to warm up. You've actually only got 15 minutes because your car broke down. You can't do anything about it. So we do the similar things with athletes. You know, how can you actually prepare if something goes wrong? You miss the bus and the next bus is 30 minutes later and you can't get there until, so you've got to be able to not let that stress you out. How do you psychologically prepare people for the uncertainties that come on? This is likely to happen when you least want it to happen, when the performance you want is your most important one. So let's prepare you for it. Putting in scenarios, putting in distractions, putting in all of these things into practice and training and competition as well. You know, getting people to try more difficult shots in training competitions, knowing that it's not important. So when I was a track cyclist sprinting, through the year, I'd get beaten quite a lot because when I raced my competitors, I would try different things with them. So by the time I got to the British Championships at the end of the year, I knew all my competitors inside out, and I knew the best way to beat them because I tried some things with them through the year and I'd been beaten. And now when I really had to win, I could win. And that's a very different way of actually trying and testing and doing things, is trying things when it's less important to make sure you win when it's really important. And that's the kind of thing I would be playing and experimenting with when I was sort of head coach leading or as an athlete myself.
Yeah, competition has often been frowned upon for young kids, but you know, and testing and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I'm fully on board with what you're saying, and competition is a driver, it's a motivator, isn't it? And it should inspire the athlete to want to improve. It should inspire them to become more inquisitive. At the level that you were involved in with the golfers, how far do you think you could push them, or did you know what the limits were in terms of the competition and what you created that environment?
I think in some ways, you know, a lot of people wanted to compete more than they probably needed to, and I do think there is a balance. And I think there were some people always wanting to compete at something that, you know, sometimes you need a competition that stretches you, and sometimes you need a competition that you're going to do well in because it gives you that confidence and belief in yourself. And trying to balance those type of competitions out I think in a planned program is really important. And trying to explain to people is that, you know, there can only be one winner and you must go in with your own objectives, and you could shoot the round of your life and still get beaten because somebody does something even better and it's out with your control. And I think that's some of the biggest issues we're trying to get a lot of our athletes is to take ownership over their individual performance and not concern themselves with others, and actually then judge themselves about what they tried to do and do proper debriefs in their performance. So even at a very early level, I think having different types of competitions, one to stretch and not have expectations, some to do well in, you know, ranges of different courses. And I still worry that a lot of people are always judging themselves against the outliers. We have this all the time. people will be judging themselves about the best ever athlete there is. You can't judge yourself against Usain Bolt. You know, he's a freak. You know, he's 6'6". Everyone says he shouldn't sprint, and he ends up being the fastest person. So you don't judge yourself against that person. So what you do is you say, let's look at the average type of person that does really well in these events, and then how do I actually work around that for me? Now, one of the big things I learned, and it relates to a bit to, probably drifts a bit out from competition, but links into training for competition. So when I was sort of head coach, and coaching's very different in cycling, and I think the question was asked at the beginning, what was it like coaching? We were more physiological trainers than technical coaches. Cycling, with the best will in the world, you strap your feet to two pedals and you whiz them around in circles. Yes, we had tacticians and there was other things we did, but the reality is the mechanics of cycling isn't that hard. It doesn't have all the different ranges of movement and things that could go wrong in a golf swing. So let's be clear about that. So coaches in cycling were often either a tactical type coach, or they were a very physiological based trainer of athletic performance, hearts and lungs more than anything else. That's the reality of what we were. And most of what I did was facilitate training environments so everyone could do what they needed to do. But the big thing I learned was I looked after 3 cyclists at that time, and most people wouldn't necessarily know all of them, but one was Chris Hoy. Most people know who Chris Hoy was. You know, he's one of the most successful Olympians we've had in the UK on track cycling. The other one was Jason Queally, who was a kilometre rider who went and won the first gold medal in Sydney for track cycling that started the whole big wave of success in cycling. The other one was called Craig McLean. Now, 2 years before Sydney Olympics, we'd only just started the World Class Performance Program with the money that came from lottery, and those 3 riders were the first 3 riders that came onto the program. 2 years before that, I was riding in the same team as Chris Hoy and Craig McLean, and we were winning British championships, and I was the lead rider in a team of 3 that we were doing well at British level. I retired, took on the head coach job, and those 2 guys came across with Jason Queally. Now, all 3 of them physiologically were sprinters, but they all trained massively different. Chris Hoy trained a lot on the track, speed, a lot on the gym, and just mixed it all together. Craig McLean didn't like the road very much, trained on the track, and did tons and tons in the gym. And Jason Queally did blocks of a month on the track, a month on the road, a month on the track, a month on the road, and hated the gym at all. Hated it. My wife used to squat more than Jason Queally, and he was Olympic gold medalist. And my wife, although she was a pretty good cyclist, she was never at that sort of level. So I learned very quickly that these 3 cyclists, who all within any one day were in a few tenths of each other in what they did, either standing starts or flying kilometers or standing kilometers, they all trained completely differently. And if I came in as a coach and said, this is my model for coaching, and you're all going to follow my model, 2 of them wouldn't have done the best they could, because they would have been probably training wrong for them and their physiology. So very quickly, I learned you just need to train the athlete and how they work and get to know them. And you need to be able to create variable training programs within single training environments to get the best out of everyone. And that was a massive learning curve for me. And they all trained massively different to me. So it would have been no good me saying, well, I was pretty successful, and now I'm taking over the coach, I'm telling you what to do. That would never work. Now, again, it's slightly different in a very technical sport like golf, where understanding the mechanics and learning all that is critical. But I very much learned that nobody learns the same way. Nobody adapts and changes the same way. And even when you're looking after a group, you need to find a way of individualizing that training within that group. And then that leads into then creating the right competition for them and the right competition structure for them, and setting the right goals, depending on if one really had to have success, they needed to go into some races where they'd win and feel success. If some didn't matter because they were on a journey and they just wanted to really train hard and they'd go into races tired, and they didn't care if they lost because their confidence was so high, they knew the end goal was there. You'd let them do that. And for me, that was a big learning curve. And I still see a lot of coaches, not looking at golf now, but in other sports, where they very much say, you want to be in my training group, this is the training I do, and you all do the same training. And that training might suit 2 out of 15, which means, you know, the good part of that group is never going to get their own personal level of success out of it. They're never going to probably reach their own personal level of performance because the training hasn't been tailored towards their needs.
Yeah, we absolutely believe in that philosophy of creating a child-centric environment, because yes, one of the skills the coach must possess is to relate to the individual, despite the fact there might be 11 other kids in the group that they're coaching. And if we want to create that engaged athlete, they have to build that relationship with that one child. Again, despite the fact that one child is part of a group and everybody's in the same environment at the same time. So it's a challenge, but it's absolutely necessary. I've just got one more question to throw in your direction, Steve, and then Stu, you can take over. But I wanted to know also, what can we do as development coaches to prepare our young athletes in the development phase of their sport for what is undoubtedly a very difficult journey towards becoming an elite athlete? What would that young athlete look like when we hand them over to the more specialized coach, if you like?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, and again, it's funny because so many sports work in different ways. We have real issues in athletics where coaches never hand anyone over. They actually want to take them from one, you know, and the issue is we've had a number of coaches, and again, it goes to outliers who have, you know, Dina Asher-Smith's coach looked after her as a young girl and's taken her on to be triple world champion. You know, you had Tony Minicello take Jess Ennis as a young child right through to multiple Olympic medalist, Olympic champion. So we've got these histories of people doing that, but they're outliers. There are 1 or 2 out of hundreds and hundreds of coaches that do it. So we don't do much handing over in athletics, which for me is a challenge. We're actually trying to get to a stage where proper good quality development coaches build the well-rounded athlete with that knowledge and understanding to move that through their journey. So the big thing, and I know that it's something that you guys do through your process, because obviously from the sideline, I've seen the type of work is building that level of independence in an athlete. The issue for most people, and you know, golfers particularly, is they become very coach dependent, and they don't get to own their own swing and their own technique, and then get the ability to help people evolve it for them, but they've got to have ownership of it themselves. And for me, within golf, that ownership of your swing, your technique is critical. So I think making people not reliant on a coach, so many coaches, and not just coaches in our sport, I think other support services, you know, strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, it could be a mix, make themselves almost critical to the journey of the athlete. And for me, if any support service person worth their salt is giving that athlete independence and confidence to know and make decisions themselves. So I think that first bit is that ownership, decision making, and giving them the confidence that they can actually work with other people to continue that journey. So coming out, I do think that much wider understanding of the sport is really helpful, and understanding how to either build a relationship with somebody that gives them trust, to be a filter to help them with other people that want to get involved. So as you tend to go through your journey, you then get your swing coach, your putting coach, you then have your S&C coach, you then have your nutritionist, you know, then you're going to see your chiropractor and everyone believes they're going to be the critical part to you on your journey. And understanding how to manage and control those interfaces with a wider support team, and build a support team that they trust, and to be careful of the types of people as they're on their journey, particularly if they're, you know, young, really aspiring up and coming golfers. It's amazing how quickly, you know, we know very quickly that the sponsors had leapt on the back. Here, have a free bag, you're fine, we'll help you, that's not a problem. You know, how do we actually manage that, people getting ahead of themselves and starting to believe the hype? We had, you know, in Scotland, because we were Scottish, you know, our golfers got offered scholarships all over the place. You know, once you were in the Scottish team, you were linked to big brand. So at that time, you were already linked in with Adidas TaylorMade, as it was then, and you had access to lots of things. So all of a sudden, people's expectation of the journey they were going on started to get ahead of themselves. And then you'd have some of our most successful amateurs have gone nowhere, and some of the real hard working amateurs that took a much longer journey were much more able to work and understand and take control of their journey, have actually gone on to do much bigger and better things. And we've had a great wave on the sort of 7 odd years I was there. The last wave of amateurs we have really kicked on onto, you know, European tour and onto the PGA tour as well. And it's great to see a lot of them at all different levels of the different professional tours doing quite well. And I think a lot of that was, one, some of them came through the very early stuff that we were doing in the development stage within Scottish golf. So they were getting a good grounding and understanding. And then as they came through, we trying to keep them under control, trying to stop them getting ahead of themselves, and trying to make sure that all the sort of support we gave them was to help them understand and plan and get to know themselves and take control and ownership of certain things that they had. And I think that's the biggest part you can do, is even now when we get people who come out of our top end of our program, and they may have been in athletics for 8 or 10 years, what we're saying is, we'd like you to come out of athletics after worked on our program as a better person, more employable, better skills, understanding, knowledge about you and the things you've got that give you the opportunities. Like I said, most of my jobs came because I'd been to 2 Commonwealth Games, I'd been to a World Championships, and I'd been a good cyclist. Because when I got into interviews, I had something different to talk about than my IT skills and whether I got Microsoft Word, you know, because when you get into these situations, you've got something else to talk and sell. And in golf, that's massive. In a lot of organizations, our top amateur golfers would get in front of people they would never get the opportunity to get in front of in the normal world. Top businessmen playing pro-ams, getting opportunities to meet sponsors. So it was helping them understand and manage that. And I think from the very earliest stage in the type of work you do, getting people to be humble, to be professional, to be polite, to know themselves, understand how to work with wider groups of people and maximize that, but be in control of it themselves is probably the thing I think you can really help all youngsters with.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic information, Stephen. You know, I was fortunate to be at Scottish Golf in the time that you were there, and saw firsthand kind of the environment and the opportunities that you helped develop, but also the realism that you helped the players and the parents also have about the journey that lies ahead. And you know, the current wave of Scottish golfers, I think, you know, is testament to what was put in place in the national framework that you did. And you look at players like Bob McIntyre and Grant Forrest and the likes that are out there and, you know, doing pretty well now. I think you can proudly say you had a part in helping them in their development. Obviously, the players got to do it themselves, but you know, there's certain things along the way that are really important for them. You talked before about a lot of interfaces, you know, in the world of athletics, and we see it in golf as well, especially parents now invest much younger with their players in terms of having a coach, a swing coach, for example, then maybe going to see a putting specialist, then going to see a strength and conditioning coach, maybe somebody to look after the mental performance side of the game. Something that I've seen a lot, and from talking with people outside of golf as well, is the communication from the different parties around the athlete sometimes gets really complicated and they don't talk with one another. The athlete tends to sometimes get lost in the middle. How much do you think that that's the responsibility of the coaching team that are around the player to make sure that they're all transparent and they communicate, or how much of that is actually on the player?
I think again it's very age specific. You know, when we're talking about these much younger, what we often talk about in athletics isn't always a coach. Sometimes it's a point of contact, the key person for that athlete, and the key person for that athlete helps connect people together on their behalf. So let's, for argument's sake, at the minute, say a young athlete, they've got their main coach, and their main coach is the person that hopefully the athlete and the parents have really got an understanding that's a key person. When they want to start bringing other people into the mix, the worst thing you can do is having 4 or 5 people work in isolation, all working on things that might be pulling against or contradicting. So all you end up with a young athlete, a young golfer getting really confused because they're actually getting mixed messages that are being given to them in silos without any cross-referencing. So the only way I think it can really work is by somebody taking some level of leadership, and at some times having all of those people together to agree what is it we're all working on. We see it a lot. If the strength and conditioning coach is working on a load of plyometric drills and the sprint coach is actually doing some high quality work and wonders why the athlete isn't doing well, and he didn't realize the athlete's knackered because they're doing a whole load of S&C that's they're not quite aware of, that's really fatigued the athlete, which means the quality sessions that the sprint coach wants to do isn't happening. So unless the sprint coach has a complete overview of that, and then actually the sports psychologist is working on some level of relaxation and they're doing a whole load of mindfulness relaxation, and actually you want them fired up because they're trying to do something block starts, and it's not about that at the minute. What's really important for the coach isn't that this person relaxes, it's actually that they get switched on so they can come out of the blocks like a rocket. So all of a sudden you've got this whole load of people, you've got a coach wondering why things aren't going right, the overarching sprint coach, you've got the S&C coach who's knackered, and then you've got the psychologist teaching the athlete to do something we don't want them to do, and it all goes pear-shaped. The athlete gets fed up, the performances go downhill, they end up getting dropped off the program or they give up. So that you've got to have somebody managing and overseeing it. I think at the beginning it needs to be that most trusted person. It should be a head coach or a point of contact or the main coach, and then they connect people together. And what I do find is, and it's probably more prevalent in golf than many other sports, probably tennis as well, is that because you do have these very young players coming in, often with a lot of parental backing, coming into systems, they want to overload them with everything. And that for me is one of the biggest mistakes. Is most good coaches know enough about most things to actually be the only person that's needed for a fair amount of the early part of an athlete's journey. You don't need to have loads of specialists. Most good coaches understand a good bit of sports psychology, good bit about conditioning, a good bit about, and they should be able to manage most of that. And then only when you move on to the next level do you start to filter people in. But you filter people in on who's the next most important person. If an athlete's if an athlete's maybe underweight and you're struggling, bring a nutritionist in to see what you might do to help them actually find a better nutritional model. If they are, struggling with mobility, bring in, a good physiotherapist to actually work on some really good stretching techniques. If it's about strength and power, bring in an S&C coach, but you don't overload them with everything all at the same time. What's the next thing we're working on? Who's the next person that can help build the relationship, build things, and then add on in layers? It tends to be, and we find it a lot in athletics, is you're over here and you look like a good youngster and you're just working with your coach. And now we've gone, they look really good. Let's bring them on the world-class performance program. And then this whole wave of people, psychologists, nutritionalists, head coaches, they all swoop in. You end up with your performance lifestyle and a whole load of other things. It just becomes chaos really quickly. And unless somebody's actually creating a barrier, managing it, what's the next most important thing to work on? Who else do we need to help us now? We may decide that one of my biggest issues, and I know sports psychology in golf, the managing the mind is massive. But if somebody hasn't got a problem with it, don't give them a bloody sports psychologist. The reality is sports psychology is really, really useful and really, really important when there's something you're really, really trying to sort out. But until that's the next biggest thing you're trying to sort out, don't bring the sports psychologist in. If the next biggest thing is the most important thing is their technique, spend more time on the range. If it's their putting, spend more time on the putting green. If then the putting is something else and it does need concentration, if it does start to, you need to look at visualization, or you're looking at some other type of aspect of psychological intervention to improve something, then bring it in. But don't just bring it in because you're now at this next level, we're going to pile all these layers on. So I think it's a really big, important thing for very early on in a career is not to overload people and manage it properly, centrally, wherever possible.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And I think, you know, that you need that person that can orchestrate, like you say, and that should be the most trusted person. And we know that the parents at that early stage and in general, parents are the biggest influences in the athlete's life. They're the ones that fund it. They're the ones that bring them to the training, get them to the tournaments. And Gavin and I talk about this all the time about, you know, educating the parents is a huge, huge part of that early stage as well, and letting them know what is hopefully the right steps for their child. But Steve, before we open it up for questions here, I've got one last thing, and anybody that's watching here, if you've got one or two questions, please have them ready for after this one. Steve, you've been fortunate with your journey to work with multiple sports, multiple world-class athletes, and multiple world-class coaches, and you've seen coaching at the highest level, and I'm sure you've seen some really poor coaching. For all of our coaches that are going to watch this today, what would you say are one or two of the traits of the world's best coaches that you've seen that come as a common theme?
I mean, the one thing is, you know, a top coach knows their sport, their event, their discipline inside out. They know it. They know the facts. They know the figures. They know the stats. They know everything, and they're able to. I always used to say this to anyone that I, like I say, coach in the loosest terms. If I agree to help somebody in a coaching sort of position, I'd say, if ever I asked you to do something and you ask me why, and I say, because I bloody told you so, don't do it. Because if I can't, as a coach, explain why I think you should be doing something, then just don't do it. So knowing your sport inside out, and when you're asking young people or even really experienced people to do things, you've got to have a good reason for why they're doing it. And whether it's Chris Hoy, or, you know, I've been lucky, Chris Hoy, Bradley Wiggins, Mo Farah, you know, I've seen these range of athletes in different sports, and I see how they work with their coaches. Their coaches are very different, but most coaches will understand why. Why are you making me do this speed session? And most people will look at an endurance race and go, oh, this person can do this distance much faster than that person. And we go, well, that doesn't really matter because that was a time trial, and that's not a race, that's a paced time trial. What's most important, most of the people who win medals, they have to do the last 400 meters in this time and the last 150 meters in this time. And as long as they're getting into the last 2 laps in the group, in contention, if they can do these 2 things, they'll win. It doesn't matter that somebody actually got sometimes 5 or 6 seconds faster if they can only do that as a paced run and they don't have that speed at the end. So, you know, you've got to know your event and discipline. And then when you're asking people to do things, you've got to show why. Why am I spending so much time practicing putting? Well, 42% of the game is actually putting. Why aren't you letting me use my driver all the time? Well, we only go off the tee this amount of time, and half of them aren't with your driver. So why would we spend all our time using our driver? So the explanation in those very early stages helps build that credibility of why you're telling people to do things. So knowing and giving good explanations to people for me is critical. Spending a lot of time listening to what, getting that confidence that, you know, for me, coaches need to be able to listen and know how to communicate to the different ages and stages of athletes they have, to ask the right open question and then tease out some of that understanding and feeling. This is what I'm seeing. What are you feeling? What are you feeling? This is how I'm interpreting it. Is that how you are? And you seem to be tired today. Is there a reason why you're tired? You don't seem to be switched on today. You're going really well today. What have you done that's different? These type of things for me. And one of the final things is I like coaches to encourage people to record things and write things down so they can reflect on them later. Now, in a lot of sports I do, we capture a lot of data. I've still got diaries from 1980s of when I was training full time for a number of years in Australia. And I know why I got injured, why I got an Achilles injury, because I could look back at diaries and see I up my training too fast. A lot of people will say, I was playing really well, you know, 3 months ago. What am I doing different? Well, go back and look at a training diary. How many rounds were you playing? How many games? How much time were you spending on the range? Was there anything you were doing different then that you can reflect on? Because again, coaches building that independence and building that inquisitiveness in their players and athletes for me is really important. So a mixture of those things. When I look at coaches, I want to have them listening. I want to see them empowering and listening to their athlete. I want to see them encouraging the athlete to, you know, write things, look things, reflect on things, and build that sort of self-understanding of themselves. And then I look at that coach and I go, that coach is really doing the best they can for that athlete. And what, like I say, doesn't happen in athletics, somewhere down the line, I think we should bring somebody else in to help us with this, because I think now we could do with somebody else helping us with this. And do you know what? I think it's now really time for you maybe to move on. I think the next stage of your journey is maybe moving on. And with, I've helped you on this part of your journey. We'll always have this, but I think now is the time for you to maybe find somebody else to take you to the next level potentially, which I think, again, golf and some sports do quite well, and a lot of sports do really badly.
Steve, as always, I mean, fantastic.
Making some very
insights.
long answers to what are some quite short questions. I do apologize. I can talk a lot, as you can tell.
No, it's all great information. And yeah, I think it's great to draw from the insights. And you've been involved with golf at the amateur level, and not only the amateur level, there was a lot of work that you did to try and help navigate that journey from the amateur level to the pro for the right individuals. And there were certain things that you helped put in place that have really paved the way for a lot of youngsters in Scotland to hopefully have the right opportunities at the right time and be presented with that environment that's going to be conducive to their development. But I think looking at the world of athletics that you're in now, and obviously multiple disciplines, your world of cycling and your involvement in other sports and governing bodies, I think it's great to look at the common themes from performance sport. And I think whether it's golf or whether it's cycling or whether it's athletics, there are common themes to any performance sport. So, no, fantastic.
I think that's something I'd really like to just go on. I go into a lot of sports and they say we're unique. We're so unique. And it's unbelievable that, you know, there are so many synergies and crossovers and relationships between lots of different sports. I've used quite a lot of golf elements into some of the stuff we're doing in athletics at the minute, because there is a lot of personal coaches, a decentralized type of program, the ability for people to just compete themselves and qualify and get into. It's not like a cycling program centralized in Manchester. If you're not part of the team and go on the World Cup circuit, you can't go to the Olympics. There's not really a career outside that unless you're in a professional team. And the same as when we brought in Tony Minicello to do a session, and it's amazing how within the world of multi-events in athletics and how they decide which bits of those multi-events do we practice more and do more on to get our score as high as possible. Great synergies with golf on which part of my golf game do I spend a bit more time practicing on, because that's the one that's likely to get my score lower. I could spend a lot of time improving this and all the stats would say that's not going to make much difference. But if I improve this, my stats will really improve. And how do I actually decide where in my limited amount of time to practice do I spend my time, and do I spend my energies and resources, whether that's money and specialist coaching and support. And it is amazing as I go through sport is how many things are very, very similar. It's just you need to apply that slightly different lens onto it. But most sports that I go into don't have many crossovers of coaches. So it was unusual in cycling for many people who weren't involved with cycling in it. In athletics, it's very unusual. Hamish Gray, who brought me into golf as a non-golfer to do something different, which was try and move the sport from being players playing a game to athletes doing a sport, because it was coming into the Olympics in that cycle as well, if you remember, was a really big mantra for us, and it really helped us actually look at things slightly differently. And golf has become such a, you've only got to look at all the stuff now with the amount of stuff on training in the gym, the technology that's sitting behind it now. It's moved on massively. It's more like Formula One racing than it is walking around with a leather bag and a 3/4 length socks as it used to be in going back into my early days of sport. Golf was in a very different place, the same as cycling was in a very different place, and now it's just massive, absolutely massive everywhere, and it's a big culture change for everyone that's involved, I think.
Yeah, perfect. We'll open it up, Steve, to a couple of questions here. We've got about 10-15 minutes left, so if anybody's got a question, please let us know, and we'll you can open your microphone up and ask away.
I'll make some of my own questions up. One of the things I found really, one of the things I found really interesting in my time is golf is some of the guys that just decided that being a career amateur is what they wanted to do, and they realized very early on that turning professional wasn't the right thing for them. They made that clear decision, and they often had long, enjoyable careers in golf. And then a lot of players who decided, no, I'm going to go pro no matter what, had a dreadful experience and then almost lost to the game forever. And it's quite an amazing thing to think about. And I think that, going back to what do you teach youngsters, is really enjoy the game and try not to jump ahead of yourself, because you might find you can fall out of love of the game if you put yourself under huge amounts of unnecessary pressure. 99% of golfers can have a good job and earn good money, enjoy the game, turn professional, not make any money, lose a lot of money, and actually end up hating the game. And I think helping parents and children understand that journey should be sensibly paced, and have realistic expectations on what is that gap between that very small group of elite professionals at the top making a lot of money to the huge amount of jobbing pros just making a living, and the huge amount of people that actually don't fall out of love with the game. And I find that happens in quite a few sports, is putting real undue pressure on yourself and actually destroying your love for the thing that you probably have loved since you were a child. And whether that's running, jumping, throwing, cycling, or golf, I see it a lot, and even more in sport than I used to, particularly things where you start very young, gymnastics, swimming, where people can't bear to be in a pool because they battered themselves senseless for years, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go swimming up and down a pool, put big aspirations on them, put under pressure, and then haven't succeeded what they want, and then just given up completely. And I find that dreadful. You know, I like to think sports for life, and that you find the sport you love and you love it, and you may do other things, but you carry on enjoying it for as long as you can. And golf is one of those few things, a bit like cycling, that you can literally do till you drop. So my view is it's a great thing to do, and I think I'd like to think that the kids coming through, it adds a lot to their whole journey of life. It gives them opportunities, aspirations, and open things up to them that they wouldn't get if they weren't, you know, they didn't play the game, they didn't enjoy the game, and they didn't use the game for the wider social aspects that it brings.
Perfect. Dr. Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question, Steve. I've really enjoyed everything that you've actually, just been talking about. One of the things that really hit me was when you were talking about, the cluster of coaches. And what I thought was really funny, and I've known this for a long time, is that one of the greatest secrets that a coach like yourself and all the great coaches here with, the Leadbetter organization, we know that the very best coach is the one who knows when not to coach. We know that overcoaching really sort of takes us in a different direction. And then we're talking about this cluster of consultants coming in. It reminds me of the Kentucky Derby we had here in the States just here, a couple of weeks ago. And they were putting all the horses in the paddock. And I kept thinking about myself, coaches are like horses in a paddock. Are we all, aimed up going the same way? And it seems to me that most coaches, as you were talking about, and I thought you articulated this very nicely, is that some coaches want to go this way, some, consultants want to go this way, and really what you have, just chaos. And I love, the analogy of a conductor of an orchestra. He is, the conductor. You've got, the flute section here, the horn section here, the percussion center here. And I just loved it when you said, I'm only going to bring in this person or these people when the athlete, really is ready for it. The question I have for you is this. We always talk about getting our people to the next level. I'm always trying to figure out, and I know what it is for me. I'd love to have your philosophy. What is the next level, for a young athlete or an aspiring athlete, even a professionally elite athlete? What's the next level that you're trying to get them to attain?
Yeah, and I think that, I've always been big in, I come from a very, historical era of long-term goal setting, and I come from a history of Olympic sports that also have within the UK or Commonwealth structure, Commonwealth Games as well, which is quite a big multi-sport games that covers a lot of the main sports. So we tended to always work in these almost 2-4 year cycles rolling all the time. So trying to decide where people were in relation to their age and stage, and where is the optimum ages and performance levels that somebody has, and just trying to help them plan that longer term journey so they know where it is they're going to go and what those transitions are. We have a big, it's probably slightly different in certain countries, and particularly in the States, where the school collegiate type of system structures quite a lot of where some of those natural transitions might be in a lot of sports, where a lot of it is very arbitrary, as we know. In athletics, it's juniors, under 20s, under 23s, moving into seniors. For me, in most sports, by the time you're under 23, you can be a world and Olympic champion anyway, or earning £1 million playing, professional sport somewhere in one of the big sports. So for me, it's what is that next realistic goal and target based on a trajectory of an athlete? We do a lot of performance tracking of a journey of an athlete. So we say, So if you're a 100-meter runner, they tend to come through pretty young. They tend to have a career that's through into their often late 20s, early 30s maximum. But if you're a thrower, it's often much later and longer. If it's an endurance, you may go through different stages of running, different endurance. So we understand what that journey is for all these, whatever, 23 odd events that we have in Olympics, and flipping 100 events in Paralympic athletics, which is a bit of a challenge. So what's that journey look like? Then how do we expect people to move through those journeys? It's one of our biggest challenges is that often when you move from one start to the journey to the next, the goals become very different, because all of a sudden you have been a junior world champion, but at the next stage up at under 23, you're almost nowhere again. And then going from being a age group champion here to full on being in the world, it's like saying, I'm one of the best amateurs, I'm now going to be on the professional tour on the PGA. You're going to be nowhere. You know, very few people will be able to jump. So having that realistic aspiration. So I like to say your next part of the journey is this. These are the goals and targets based on your trajectory of where we're trying to take you. And to be honest, at the minute, I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't think you're going to be a professional golfer. But let's keep going on the journey, and let's keep checking in the milestones, and, you know, let's see where we get to. But at the minute, let's not set limits on you. We want to be a pro golfer. Well, to be a pro golfer, you've got to be really able to do this, this, and this. Here we are now. Here's the next stage of our journey. And that might be an age group, it might be a level of competition, but it might just be a performance measure that we know needs to improve to move to the next level. You know, handicaps in golf is one thing that helps, but really playing to your handicap, as we know from all the stuff we did on handicaps, you know, most people would play nowhere near their handicap when we took them to the World Amateur Championships or the European Amateur Championships. They just didn't play to their handicap. So those handicaps were relatively worthless. How people play on hard courses under pressure against the top competition is the real game, and trying to expose people to make those their stepping stones. These are arbitrary. Here's your journey. Let's be honest about it. Let's not limit your aspiration, and let's help you tick off bits of that journey. Let's not get if this next part of our journey takes 2 years, that's fine. If actually we find we get to the next part of that journey in 6 months, then let's stop and recheck our balance and see what the next part of the journey is going to be. That's our journey, and we'll go along it with you. And when you have those big stepping stones, moving a coach, moving from home to a college with a college coach and a different coach, or leaving a college that supported you for years and now you're on your own, and how are you going to, suddenly you've not got access to this coach, you're now on your third coach, the coach that started your college coach, and now you've left college and you can no longer work with them. Who's now going to look after you? How do you help people through those transitions? How do you prepare an athlete that you might be somebody that will just give them good advice and go on their whole journey with them, even though you're no longer their real coach? And I think that's a real thing that young athletes, along with their parents, can really get from a good entry and induction coach. Is, I'm not now the right person to coach on, but I'm a person you can come to for sound, independent advice to help you make the right decisions for the next part of the journey, because we built this great trust and respect over these years that we've worked together. Does that sort of another rambling answer from me, but that's my sort of.
No, that's a very, very good answer, because, you know, I've had a lot of unbelievable athletes come to me and say they're 22, 23 years of age. And they say, I've actually achieved every goal, you know, that I've ever set for myself. I've even attained, you know, a Super Bowl ring. Now what should I do? Where do I go here? And I think you've articulated this for everyone, you know, quite nicely, because it's just sort of resetting, you know, your values, your aspirations, and where would you like to go? I think you've done, you know, a brilliant job of articulating that, Steve. So thank you for that.
And I think, you know, in a lot of professional sport, it's helping people understand what is their life going to be like after sport. We have these milestones and journeys and transitions within the sport. But one of the biggest transitions that most professional athletes don't really manage well is their transition out of sport. You know, where are they going to go? Everyone can't be a commentator. Everyone can't be a coach. Most really top athletes are pretty poor at being coaches anyway, because the selflessness and skills you need to be a great coach often don't translate to the selfishness that you need to be a great athlete. And there's few people can cross over that, but not all. And I've certainly seen that. A lot of people have made really good decisions not to coach, even when they've been top athletes, because they know what you need to do that isn't within their DNA. So I think helping people that transition out of sport is a really big thing. And then this big thing for me is, if you really love your sport, even though you've aspired to do everything you want to do, you still want to get up and play golf. So I worked a lot with Catriona Matthews for probably about 3 years as her S&C coach. She wanted somebody that would just help her and not come in with all this gobbledygook, somebody a bit old school. And I was pretty old school. So I came in and I wrote her programs and did a lot. And she, you know, she was coming to the end of her career, but she was physically, she could out gym nearly anyone on the Scottish Golf Women's program, and being twice the age of most of them. You know, that was the reality. She could squat, she could power clean, she could, you know, do intervals on the push bike, you know, on the indoor trainer. She was fit. She'd run 5K. She was a real, she loved being fit, and she knew being fit would keep her career going. And she loved golf so much. She'd put all that work in because she loved the training. She'd put in the golf because she loved the golf. And even if she's not winning as much as she ever was, she just loved playing golf. Now, that's how you want to finish your career. You want to be able to finish your career, even though you've achieved great things and you're no longer achieving them, you're still going to get up and go out and play in the rain because you just love playing golf. And I want people through their journey not to get so fed up with it and the pressures that are put on them that they give it up early, they don't get, or they don't just see their career through to what is a natural end, where they then go on to do other things and can look back positively. I look back on my career, and I never got to the Olympics. I never won the big, but I had a great career. I loved my time riding my bike, and I look back on it fondly. And I speak to quite a lot of athletes now who look back on their career and they don't look on it fondly at all, because the pressures put on them and the pressures they put on themselves because of what sport has become has really damaged them coming out of sport. And I want people to love their sport. And I think we as coaches in that life can really help them with that by keeping them a bit grounded and making them understand why they do it, and not putting undue pressures on them to achieve these often unrealistic expectations. Because only, you know, one in every flipping, you know, 1,000 is actually going to go on and win a major and earn enough money out of golf that they can retire comfortably and not have to worry about anything again. Because that's just the reality of what it is. We did a great big survey on Scottish golf of all the golfers over 25 years that turned professional, and there was only about 5 or 6 that actually ever made any money out of it. And that's just the reality. The majority of them no longer played golf. The majority of them had lost a lot of money trying to get their aspiration and dream. And only a very, very small proportion, a tiny proportion, had actually gone on and made enough money out of golf to say they'd been a professional, made a living, and could hang up their golf clubs at the end and actually look back and have enjoyed their career, which is pretty sad, to be honest. And it was the big thing that I always wanted to make sure people came out of the sport still loving it.
Brilliant, Steve. As always, great to hear your experience and your learnings. And you know, I think it's really important that you look back on your time on your bike and you remember it fondly. And I think that's a lesson to everybody watching this, is, you know, from a coaching point of view, making sure that you're always trying to remember that majority of your players and all of your players, at the end of it, you want them to still retain that love for the game. You know, we all started because we learned to like the game. We're all still involved, especially for all of us in golf. We're all involved in it because we fell in love with the game for whatever reason. A lot of it's down to the environment, the opportunities that come along the way. And for most of us, that's what our parents put in place, and they joined us at a golf club and made sure that we were at the right place. And you know, we've all still held that. And I think sometimes we forget that when we coach, and it's very easy to almost get too serious. But yeah, I think on the whole, Steve, you know, some fantastic advice, fantastic learnings. I think on behalf of everybody that's watching, Gavin and myself, we'd like to say a huge thank you for your time this evening. And it's been a pleasure.
No, not a problem. And you've got my contacts, and if there's anyone ever wanted to follow up on anything particular, I've got lots of different little snippets of bits and pieces. And if somebody ever wanted to share anything or explore anything, and wanted to get in touch, although I've always got a busy diary, I always like the chance to explore, share. It's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy listening to other people talk about their sports and their journeys, and I'm always happy to share and get involved. So feel free to contact me if there was anything that you thought it would be interesting to chew over. Be more than happy to do so.
No, Steve, that's brilliant. Yeah, if anybody has any questions or wants to connect with Steve, feel free to drop me an email or a message, and I'll happily connect the two of you. Brilliant.
The big thing for me now is trying to I've got two teams going out to Europe, a million COVID regulations to tick off, and then hopefully they won't cancel the Olympic Games between now and the next 8 weeks. Or otherwise, I've just spent 5 years of my life trying to prepare a load of athletes to at least win a handful of medals to keep the British Olympic Association and the government who sponsor us happy. And then we've got to do it all again. So good luck to all of you. Really interesting to have a little chat, and hopefully our paths may cross again in some other part of this sporting world. It's a fairly small world.
No, brilliant. Steve, good luck at the Olympics, and thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Not a problem at all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.